Hello and welcome to the Walrus Talks at Home Funding Change presented by TakingITGlobal. I'm Jennifer Hollett. I'm the Executive Director of the Walrus. I'm also your host and moderator this evening, and we're thrilled to be joining you online across the country and around the world. I'd like to start by acknowledging the land that I'm on right now here at home in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, Toronto. A land acknowledgement helps us recognize history, thinking about how it informs where we are now and what changes can be made going forward in a commitment to reconciliation. Our offices at the Walrus and where I am right now are located within the bounds of Treaty 13, signed with Mississaugas of the Credit. The land is also the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples. Today, Toronto is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We're honored to contribute to a rich tradition and history of storytelling, and we encourage you, wherever you're joining us from tonight, to reflect on the land that you're on. And as part of the ongoing work of reconciliation, if you haven't already or done so recently, read the 94 calls to action recommended by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and we'll be sure to add that into the chat. So a bit about the Walrus. We're Canada's conversation. And that conversation can be challenging, urgent, complex, and thoughtful. And we aim to spark conversation in a number of different ways, starting with our journalism, which I have it handy, is available in print, but also online at thewalrus.ca, on social media, in podcasts, and also through our event series like this one. And our work is made possible and powered by our donors, our supporters, and our partners. So thank you all for being here, and especially to TakingITGlobal. Right now, I'm excited to welcome Jennifer Corriero, who I met when she was quite young, and this was an idea in the works over 2 decades ago. So it's great to see what TIG is doing today and beyond. She's the co-founder and executive director of TakingITGlobal. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi.
Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yes, I also feel so nourished by the land and the water and the places of inspiration. And you can check out whose.land to learn more about the traditional territory that you live on. That was one of the commitments that we made to help grow that app and website. And there's so many things I want to share in this 2 minutes. What I'm going to focus on is this wish related to the theme of funding change, which is to imagine if every young person, while they were growing up, had a chance to lead a project. When I was a teenager back in 1999, I had a chance to be involved in a few community projects. And I was one of the first high school students, like the first year where they were doing the mandatory community service hours. And it was very hard to find a placement. I applied to different community organizations and they didn't have capacity. They didn't know what we could do. So I started creating things for myself. I said I could do this or I could do that. And that was my early experience in designing a community impact project. When we started TakingITGlobal back in 1999, our whole idea was to support not only our generation of youth, but every generation of youth in having access to opportunities to be inspired, informed, and involved. And so it was really a dream come true 5 years ago. In 2017, when we launched the RisingYouth Community Service Grants Program. We had run microgrants programs for over 15 years in cohorts of about 30 a year. And this was a magnitude bigger than we thought we could even do. And so over the past 5 years, we've actually delivered over 7,000 microgrants to Canadians across every province and territory. Over 1,000 of those grantees are First Nations, Inuit, and Métis youth. We are so amazed by the creativity that has come forward, and over $7.8 million has gone directly into those grants. Big thanks to the Canada Service Corps at the Government of Canada that supported this initiative. And so this initiative has come to a close. RisingYouth has come to a close in our cycle. And so today I just wanted to share that message that I believe in the power of microgrants, and I'm so inspired by the people that we're all going to have an opportunity to hear from today. And just one fun stat stat, 98% of youth who completed the impact survey, they're now stating that they're more likely to participate in future community service. So the big idea for funding change, in my perspective, is microgrants. I'm so honored to have had the chance to be part of this program and to listen to what will be here tonight. Thank you.
It's an incredible story. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Tonight's talks takes a look at the enormous potential of youth grassroots funding, ultimately to improve our society and to fuel civic engagement. What motivates young people to contribute to their communities, like Jennifer's personal story, and how can their capacity and unique perspectives be better supported? How can public policy and legislation contribute to larger systemic change? We'll be digging into these questions, and we're also going to hear some incredible stories and really case studies about how accessible funding have a really big impact on rising generations. Here's how the Walrus Talks at Home works. Each speaker coming up has 5 minutes live, and once your head is full of new ideas, we'll have a moderated Q&A session with the speakers and you, our audience at home. So if you have a question, just type it into chat, or if you're watching on Facebook Live, the comments. And we also encourage you to share this conversation on social media. So whether there's something that you hear, you can tweet that out, or take a picture of how you're watching us tonight and post that on social media and tag us. I love that connection that we can create using a hashtag. The hashtag is Walrus Talks, and you can find us on all the social media platforms at the Walrus. Coming up, we'll be hearing from Justine Abigail Yu, founder of Living Hyphen, Dr. Heather Lawford, professor at Bishop's University and Canada Research Chair in Youth Development. Michelle Friesen, TakingITGlobal, RisingYouth alum. That's another hashtag RisingYouth. And the Honourable Ratna, Omidvar, Senator for Ontario. Thanks again to everyone for joining us tonight. We're going to kick things off first with Justine Abigail Yu. Justine, over to you.
Hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Justine Abigail Yu, and I'm the founder of Living Hyphen, a community that explores what it means to live in between cultures. We started as a print magazine back in 2017 when conversations around representation were very much on the fringes and not at all in the mainstream like it is today. Back then, I would browse through the Canadian literature aisle of bookstores and notice a very specific homogeneity in authors' names. I would visit art galleries and peruse exhibitions that featured primarily white artists. And this was all in a country where millions of people claim over 250 distinct ethnic origins and where, quote unquote, diversity is our strength. And so Living Hyphen was born out of this glaring lack of representation in arts and literature. And the response in starting this community has made abundantly clear how crucial it is to have a space that prioritizes racialized storytellers. Upon launching our inaugural issue, we sold out our first print run within a single month. We've since reprinted that issue twice, printed 2 more issues, and published over 150 artists and received over 1,000 submissions across the country. We've secured distribution in bookstores across both Canada and the US. We began hosting a podcast. We even adapted some of our stories into a stage play. But for every person who submitted their story, I received 20 more emails from racialized folks who expressed the shame and the doubt that they have felt in telling theirs. So many have spoken to me about having to quiet and hide parts of themselves to fit a very specific mold that they've been told they needed to fit into. The truth is that those of us from racialized communities, we've been told from our earliest days by the institutions and the influences around us that our stories don't matter, that our stories are not worth listening to, are not valid, are not Canadian enough, are not X ethnicity enough. And so those stories are left not only unheard, they're left entirely untold. Representation matters, yes. We need to see ourselves in the media to even be able to imagine ourselves in experiences. We need to see ourselves in the media to aspire for opportunities greater than what may be available in our immediate worlds. But after reading those messages, I realized that more than representation, we need funding. We need programming, resources, and mentorship to turn that imagining into a reality. And so I set out to organize and facilitate our first writing workshop, a space where racialized storytellers could share their stories freely. As an independent publication, Living Hyphen didn't have the money to make that happen. But luckily, I came across TakingITGlobal's RisingYouth grant. And so I applied for $750 to help me cover the cost of a space and provide writing materials for our attendees. And now I know that $750 might not sound like a lot of money to you, but it was huge for us. We gathered 10 writers for 3 hours of writing and story sharing, and it was transformative. Together, we created a space where we could courageously share our complicated stories and actually be seen and heard without having to explain our experiences. It was a vulnerable and generative space for racialized writers to finally see themselves as exactly that, writers. That moment and that money was so pivotal in Living Hyphen's journey. After seeing how transformative this kind of program could be, we set out to do it again, and again, and again. 3 years later, we've hosted over 120 workshops with over 1,700 writers joining us from all across Turtle Island. We've partnered with libraries, with school boards, and other cultural organizations to deliver our writing workshops. And those writers have now gone on to publish their work, not just in our magazine, but in countless other publications. That funding was a complete game changer for us. It allowed us to see what was once just an idea and turn it into a living reality that has deeply affected the lives of so many. So I'll say it again, representation matters, yes. But if we want to move towards truly cultivating diverse voices, we must go deeper. We must provide the resources, mentorship, and funding to make that happen. Thank you.
Hello, from the traditional unceded territory of Abenaki and the Wabanaki Confederacy. I'm Heather Lawford, and since my 20s, I have been fascinated by this idea of generativity, by which I mean investing in future generations, leaving a legacy, or creating a lasting impact. Research has long established that generativity is arguably the single best predictor of successful adulthood. It predicts good parenting, it predicts good work or career development, it predicts high life satisfaction. And for women, it often is the reason that they engage in politics. So if generativity is so important for adults, what does it mean for youth? Well, there continues to be doubt in academia and in policy and programming spaces about the relevance of generativity for youth. Over the years, I've heard many decision makers argue that young people cannot be generative because they don't have a need to be needed, they don't have a sense of their own mortality, or they're too focused on themselves to focus on others. All the work we've done in our community and youth lab indicates that these assumptions are just not true. So whenever I hear these assumptions, I wonder about the youth generativity we're missing out on because we assume it's just not there. Organizations that support youth generativity, like TakingITGlobal, put their money where my mouth is. They value and resource youth ideas and initiatives. You see evidence of early generativity in the youth who engage in Taking It Global. They engage in issues that will impact generations to come, like climate change, public education, truth and reconciliation, protecting and preserving Indigenous languages, dismantling structural racism, access to healthy food, even music and art. They engage with these issues, they form a plan about how to address these issues, and they connect with allies and partners who will help them put their plans into action. Thanks to organizations like Taking It Global, we are witnessing the formation of youth legacies in real time. When I think about how Taking It Global supports youth generativity in conjunction with the research that we've done, the success of microgrants makes a lot of sense to me. Our research suggests that young people in general are very motivated by a desire to leave a lasting impact. And they are all looking for spaces where they can build their legacy. We see the importance of the intergenerational component of generativity, where adult allies support youth and tell the story of their work and their role in getting us to this point. Highly generative youth seem to understand that they are the legacy of the generation before them, and that informs their decisions of how they can shape our future. It has been such a privilege to learn from these incredibly generative youth across Canada and have my mind open to the diversity of ideas, experiences, and opinions that they bring. In this research, youth have told us how we as adult leaders could support their legacy work. We need to listen. We need to keep an open mind and trust their ideas. We need to offer them resources and funding, and we need to advocate to give them a space at the table. If there's one thing I've learned from this, when people of all ages create space for youth generativity, we all benefit. Thank you.
Dunche, INJ Shokwathan, ING Michelle Friesen Uye, Agara Theodore Uye, Taankwachan Iche, Agunda Iche, Kwanlin Kwatsan Iche. My name's Michelle Friesen, and I have my son Theodore, so you may hear him chime in. We are of the Wolf Clan, and we live in what some people call Whitehorse on the traditional territories of the Kwanlin Dun First Nation and our family's First Nation, the Taankwachan Council. Today, I wanted to share my perspective as someone who has had the privilege of receiving a Taking It Global Rising Youth grant and all the support and encouragement that comes with that. The first time I was introduced to Taking It Global was attending a Rising Youth funded event, which was hosted by a youth member in my community. It was called Beads, Buttons, and Bannock. And as someone who was just starting my journey into reconnecting with my culture, I can't explain what it was like to have a safe space with my peers to come and do that. When I shared with this youth that I was looking for more ways to connect and to please let me know if they knew of any other workshops, they said something to me that would set me on the path that brought me here today. Why don't you host your own? So that's what I did. And I started with a $750 micro grant from the Taking It Global Rising Youth program and was able to spend a weekend on the land with elders and youth building drums. After seeing everyone come together in that way, I knew I wanted to continue to create space in my community to inspire others just the way I was inspired by that first workshop. Then, as we all know, the pandemic began. And as an alum, I had the opportunity to apply for a second grant to address an issue related to COVID. This time, I decided to follow my passion as a mountain biker. With travel restrictions in place and living in the wilderness city, I saw many new women joining the sport, seeking the same guidance I did when I began. I also saw the sport as a way to get out of isolation in a safe and healthy way. And for the last few years, we've been hosting a bike race that have connected women and girls from ages 5 to 65 to mental health and wellness resources while helping to build confidence on the trails. At the time, I think I didn't fully understand the impact that these events were having, until one day a good friend of mine asked me to join them as a candidate in the territorial election. They reminded me that what I was doing was more than just a bike race, and that all those good intentions I had were exactly what we should be looking for in our leadership. So I decided to run, and it was the scariest thing I've ever done in my life, But after months of connecting and learning from those around me, I was the runner-up in my riding, losing by only 46 votes. After realizing the importance of the representation we were able to provide through that election, and with the confidence I'd built creating budgets and writing reports with Rising Youth, I applied for outside funding to oversee an 18-month project to share this experience and encourage diversity in leadership and politics. I soon realized that this connection to community was my passion, and when the chance came to run in the municipal election, I jumped at it and became the first Indigenous woman to ever serve on Whitehorse City Council. We're coming up on 1 year since the election, and I feel thankful every day to have the privilege of listening and learning from those who share this home with me, and deep gratitude for everyone who inspired and supported me to get there. I've always hated the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? When I think back to where I was 5 years ago, I never would have imagined being where I am now. And it all started with Rising Youth believing in me and saying, yes, that's a great idea, and we're here to support you. It opened doors to mentors, community, experience, and knowledge that had immeasurable impact for myself and those around me. What started as an investment of a couple of $100s in my projects has grown into an opportunity to encourage representation and positive change in my community year over year. And I know that if we continue to invest in our youth, we will have positive impacts that will inspire communities and create a worthwhile return on their investment that reaches far beyond $750. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the Walrus Talks for inviting me to speak to this topic, and I'm grateful for a number of reasons. First of all, as you can see, I'm not exactly young anymore, and being in this crowd makes me feel younger, so I doubly appreciate the opportunity. And it's so incredibly inspiring to hear from the grassroots work of Michelle and Justine and others, and the reflections of Dr. Lawford. So I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to talk about structural change, which will change the systems around the way people access funding, in this particular case, young people access funding, because legislative change is now my bread and butter. It is not as exciting as the work that Justine described or Michelle described, but it is system shifting in that it doesn't change the possibilities of one group or one individual, but changes the possibilities for everyone. So I'm from Toronto. It's a word that originates from a Mohawk word, which is Takaranto, meaning the place in the water where the trees are standing. That is where I live, and it's quite a beautiful way of describing where I live. I know that the title of this talk is Funding Change, but I'm going to ask for forgiveness if I talk about finding change instead, because that's kind of what I do. And I'm going to describe a particular initiative that led to systemic legislative change and overhaul as in my role as a senator, and particularly in my interest in the work of charities and not-for-profits. I have never ever worked in none of my jobs have been in the private sector. I have always worked in the charitable, not-for-profit or academic sector, and I believe very firmly that that is one of the reasons I was appointed as a senator. And during my discovery of the legislation that governs charities and not-for-profits, I found that grassroots movements, not-for-profit organizations, small groups like Justine's organization or Michelle's organization are uniquely disadvantaged from accessing charitable dollars because they are not registered charities themselves, even if their work, as described, is in the public good. So as per the law, which is the income tax law, charities are not able to partner with informal grassroots movements or not-for-profit organizations and give them charitable grants because they are not charities. Instead, what they have to do, and I'm pretty sure this is what TakingITGlobal did, is they find a workaround, which is onerous. It is a legal fiction, and it is enough of a scare for many foundations and charitable organizations to choose to step away from working with youth organizations that are grassroots led. So let me just give you an example. The YMCA, which is a big youth organization, which is charitable, which raises millions of charitable dollars every year, can use their charitable dollars to run their own youth programs, which they do. But if they want to work with an indigenous organization, let's say on a reserve, and that's not a charity, but an informal not-for-profit or even just a movement, the only way they can do that is through a very complicated legal agreement, which effectively puts the YMCA in charge of the charity. This law is called the Direction and Control Law. Now, I just ask you all, the income tax law is complex code, but imagine what those two words, direction and control, mean to indigenous organizations and racially and organizations led by Black individuals or racial minorities. The situation becomes far more complex when you're dealing with international development organizations, because charities like, Plan Canada are located in Canada, and they have to work with grassroots groups overseas. And the only way they can do that is with exercising this direction and control. And no wonder then that this law has been perceived in Canada and outside Canada as colonial and patronizing. And its implications are severe. The evidence tells me that less than 1% of Canada's charitable dollars go to Indigenous organizations. Less than 1% of Canada's charitable dollars, I'm talking about $8 billion a year, goes to Black-led organizations. So the work that is needed the most has the least charitable participation. So this is the context that I kind of stumbled into. So it's not easy, colleagues, to change the Income Tax Act. But in the last government, after 3 years of work, and I don't want to gloss over the hard work and the many knocks that I took, but the support of the charitable sector was incredible. And last year in the budget, Minister Friesen agreed to the change. So as of now, the implications are being worked out, the guidelines are being worked out, and as of very soon, charities like the YMCA will be able to work with Indigenous grassroots or Black-led youth movements without exercising this so-called legal fiction. So, there's a structural change that will change the way everything works. There are other structural changes that are required in Canada. One of them that I'm working on is youth voting, lowering the voting age. I'm sure Michelle will be interested in this, from 18 to 16. That's not going very well, but legislation is like this. It takes a long time. And before I close, I want to cast the eyes and ears of our audience to what young people overseas are doing, particularly in Iran. That revolution that is now in the making is led by young women. It is led by young people. And what we can do in Canada is provide support to the young people of Canada by confiscating sanctioned assets held in Canada and returning them back to the victims, in this case, the young people. So I will stop here. Happy to take any questions. Please forgive me for that bit of a rant.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate your rant. I would argue it's still a talk, and I'll get you to turn off your camera and then I'll invite you back in a little bit. I just want to check in with our audience right now. Also, thank you to Michelle Friesen and baby Theo, Dr. Heather Lawson, and Justine Abigail Yu. All right, we are excited to open up this conversation as we move to the Q&A. So to our audience at home, thanks again for joining us. Where are you? Where in the country are you? I always like to find out. You'll see a poll has popped up. So we have people connecting from Regina. Hello and welcome. Moncton, Winnipeg, Peg City. Hello, Red Deer. Whitehorse, of course, no surprise. This is great. Thank you so much. And again, if you have a question, one from the talks, or if you think of a question as we move into conversation, just submit it in the comments, or if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can put it in the thread there. All right, I'm now going to ask our talkers to turn back on their cameras, and we're going to move into a Q&A session. I have a few questions. I was inspired by all of your talks just to kick things off. But really, as Canada's conversation, encourage you to jump in, and you can ask questions of each other. So, you know, listening in, it's clear that there are a lot of barriers that young people face just getting involved that perhaps former young people forget about. So Justine, if you don't mind, if I start with you, can you just highlight all the things that get in the way? I mean, you pointed to everything from shame and doubt, resources, but yeah, just say you're a young person, you're an idea.
Yeah.
What are you looking at?
I have personally looked at applying at many grants for Living Hyphen and all of our different creative projects, but honestly, it is incredibly complicated. I've looked through many grant application forms. They are long. The terminology is very difficult to understand. It is very cumbersome. Like even when it comes to the technology that a lot of these grant systems use, their portals and whatnot, it's a lot of work. And it is, you know, I have worked previously in the nonprofit sector and know that, you know, grant writing is an entire job on its own, you know? And so as a young person who does not have that as a professional background, as professional experience, it's incredibly intimidating, first and foremost. It's really difficult to even start working on a grant. And so I've honestly stopped in the middle of certain applications, have not even begun certain applications because it is quite intimidating. And, you know, I want to also acknowledge my privilege, one, as a I don't want to say native English speaker because it's my second language, but I speak fluently. You know, I'm post-secondary educated. I have a certain level of education that you would think would make this easy, but it's still very difficult for me. And that's just, you know, the logistics, that's just the technical side of it. But like you mentioned, Jen, the confidence to actually go out and think that I can apply for a grant is a whole other ball game. And so, yeah, those are just some of the barriers I think that goes into grant applications. And so, sorry, I'm rambling, but the TakingITGlobal grant, the RisingYouth grant, it was so easy. Like it was like, you know, few questions, name, address, what is your project? What is a sketch of your budget? Very bare bones. And they even had somebody call me or email me asking me certain questions, if I wasn't able to fill out a certain part, helping me fill out these parts that needed a little bit more finessing or details or clarification, which you really don't get anywhere else. And that kind of support, that nurturing, that mentorship that I talked about, I think is something that is so key if we do want to mobilize change amongst our youth.
Senator, I'm seeing you nod, and my guess would be this is part of also the advantage registered charities have knowing how to navigate the system. Would love to hear your thoughts on this.
I think the system, as Justine has said, is too complicated. It's too complex for young people to navigate. You do need some kind of a navigation engine. In this case, it was TakingITGlobal. But I do believe that the trust that charities have makes it easier for them to get grants. I would not suggest, Justine, that you become a charitable organization. That's not the answer for everybody, but the answer is to have what is called trust-based philanthropy, which is terminology that is now rising to the surface. There are challenges, especially with government grants. Much as the government would like to make it easier to give small amounts of money out, regardless of how small it is, there is accountability attached to public dollars. And I think we all know what happens when one youth group, we will not mention them in this webinar, when one youth group gets in the media in a negative way, it impacts all. Charitable donations fell in the last 2 years, partly because of one scandal and COVID. I think more COVID, and we have to do everything we can to regenerate generosity in Canadians. But I think activists and grassroots organizations also need to understand that there is accountability involved. So make it easy to give you grants by telling us clearly up front what your impact is going to be, how you're going to measure it, by when you're going to measure it, who are your references, all that nice stuff is essential.
Thank you, Michelle. Your story is incredibly inspiring, and thank you for serving your community. What surprised people the most about your runs for office? Because it sounds like you even surprised yourself the way you told the story.
Yeah, I think I definitely never saw myself as a politician. That was never like a career path that I kind of sought out. But I think really like the turning point was that person coming to me and saying like, I want you to run with me. Like what you're doing is important. It's more than just a bike race. It's community building. It's bringing people together. It's creating opportunity. And that really just turned something for me. And I thought, oh yeah, okay, I'm already doing these things in my community. So like, why shouldn't I be in these spaces, you know? And I think, again, that representation piece became really important because when we think of a politician, we think really in this box, you know, like usually a man or someone in a suit or somebody with that comes from a lot of money. And I just, those aren't things that you need to have or be to be a leader. And I was already being a leader in my community. And so I thought it was really important for me to give that a try and try to help and show other people that they were also leaders in their community, and that if I can do it, you can do it, and you should do it. And your voice matters. What you have to say is important. We're making decisions about our future, and we need to be in the room and be a part of those conversations. So
I would assume also too, donations to your campaign helped. So there's, you know, a theme here of not just saying you should run or that's a good idea, you should do something with it, but actually then funding and support.
Yeah, and I was really lucky to have an amazing group of volunteers and friends and family and support that were behind me that helped me with all of those things, because when I first got into politics, I honestly had no idea what I was doing. I learned everything along the way. But yeah, I think like that piece, again, just realizing, you know, like who I am and the things that I was doing and my values were things that are just inherently who I am, and I can learn the other things later. Like you can't teach somebody to be a good person, or you can't teach somebody to have empathy. So yeah, very thankful for everyone who helped me and supported me along the way. And I'm definitely a lot more confident and finding my voice in these arenas now.
Well, that's what it's all about. Now, Heather, especially because you work so closely studying youth and generativity, why is it important for young people to have control and creative direction over their projects? It seems obvious, yet there's always someone saying, I have more experience. I used to be a young person. I'm still technically a young person coming in, trying to help out and support, but then it does remove agency from the young people involved, I would assume.
Yeah, and certainly I've been guilty of that, of thinking I know better and trying to to redirect, or thinking I'm young when I'm really middle-aged. It's getting really hard to deny.
It happens. It happens to the best of us. Yeah.
I loved what Michelle said about not liking the question, where are you going to be in 5 years? Because in spaces where I am, young people, I hear them told all the time that what they're doing doesn't matter right now, but it'll be good for them when they grow up. So when you're an adult, this experience will really matter. And that's a really devaluing of the work that they're doing now and how it's benefiting all of us now, how we get to share and enjoy the stories that Justine Abigail is creating for us, that we get to benefit from the advocacy and policy work and political work that Michelle is doing. So I love that piece. And I think we need young people to believe that they can do it. I think they start to believe this message that we send to them of that they're not generative yet, that their ideas don't matter yet. But actually our research shows that they can see things that adults can't see. They can see problems we can't identify, and they have really unique and effective ways of addressing them. So if we leave them out of the conversation, if we leave them out of decision making, we're really doing a disservice to ourselves.
Can I jump in and add to
Yeah.
that, Jen? Yeah, I think it's, the work that I do with Living Hyphen focuses specifically on race as an intersection of identity, and people from racialized communities are told the same thing. Like I said, that our stories don't matter, that our lived experiences are not enough, are not valid. It's the same for youth. It's just another intersection of identity that we devalue and whose lived experiences matter. And just like in any other situation, these people know their problems the most, and they also have the keys to solving them, and so why don't we apply that to youth as well? I think it is, I think that is similar, as something that I see in the work that I do, and applying it here in this conversation around youth.
And then with that intersectionality, there's also a hierarchy too, right? So if you're young and white versus young and racialized versus young and racialized and trans, for example, that would play out in terms of also who we take seriously, or perhaps who society deems as a spokesperson for young people. Senator, I want to bring you in. Thank you so much for highlighting the work that you've been doing with the Effective and Accountable Charities Act. I'd be curious, what are some of the added benefits of charities working with non-charities beyond ease, beyond making it easier? I'm sure there's a lot of additional benefits, and would love to know what you've heard and found in your work.
Well, I think ease is one tiny part of it. What's really important is empowerment and relationships of equality and relationships of trust between two partners who are dedicated to a goal that is aligned with the charitable purpose of the organization that is the charity in this case. So I think it is far more about partnerships, about unusual suspects being brought into the charitable playground, if I may use that word. As I said, Canadians are generous people. They give generously, but by and large, they will give generously to institutions that are storied, museums, hospitals, universities. And this law will make it easier for Canadians to think of generosity a little differently and work with organizations like TakingITGlobal and the organizations that we have today, Justine. And I'm so impressed with Michelle. Really, I am. I think that running for public office is such an important aspect of youth participation and youth leadership. And we make it so difficult for people to run and for people to stay in politics. So I really think what you're doing is transformational. We need more young people to run for office, and charities can't support young people running for office because that's political, but charities can support young people training. to run for public office or can support a capacity building effort that brings aspiring politicians and their mentors together. It was a happy accident for you, Michelle. How do we institutionalize that a little bit through charitable dollars would be, I think, the challenge.
And Michelle, yeah, I'd love to continue that thread. I think what's so interesting about your story is it starts with sport, connects to youth, then to politics. And that actually makes a lot of sense. Yet you don't see a lot of programs connecting sport, youth, and politics. So yeah, I'd love to hear your learnings. And again, that feels like something only a young person would bring because they're in it.
Yeah, I think I was in that exact situation, right? Where it was just a bike race. It was just something fun to do. Like I saw that people were looking for that outlet, and I saw that people were struggling with isolation. And I guess I knew those things, but I just didn't realize the impact that I was having in doing that. And thankfully somebody did notice that. And so I think that it was really important that that person reached out to me and said, you know, what you're doing is important. And here's another way, like on a larger scale, that you could keep doing that and keep advocating for your community. And so I think, the senator just touched on charities not being able to support a candidate, but we can do all those things that would help prepare somebody to step into the world of politics. And so after my experience in the first territorial election, and I touched on it briefly, I ran that 18-month project to encourage representation and diversity in leadership and politics. And so it was actually called Lead As You Are. And we had a website and a Facebook page, but we actually just hosted a virtual conference. It was a full day, and we highlighted Indigenous women in politics. We highlighted women in business. We highlighted youth. We highlighted people who were sitting on boards of directors, because those are all important leadership roles. And I think we just need to help show people that it is leadership. You are doing these things already, and you can do it in these other ways too, if you so choose.
I'm hearing a theme of decolonizing funding and how we do this work. What does that mean? Senator, you brought this up in terms of looking at what we're doing in Canada versus internationally. I'd love to hear your thoughts and invite anyone else to jump in and what that means in this work.
Well, the giving of money from one individual to another, let's boil it down to people being generous and compassionate. There's always a power play in that. Right. I think we have to recognize that there is a power imbalance, and by bringing charitable organizations and charitable dollars and philanthropy more in touch with the grassroots, and by creating relationships that go both ways, then you can take some of that power imbalance out. I'm personally not sure you can ever completely take it out. I love the way Justine from Living Hyphen described the relationship that she experienced with Taking IT Global. Ideally, that's the way charitable giving should work, because it's not about the rich giving to the poor. It's about building a society together, and you can't do that if there is a significant power imbalance. So I think it's a step in the right direction. I'm not sure we'll completely take it out. I don't want to be Pollyannish about this, because people with money always have more power than people without money. And the one way we can equalize that is through political representation, as Michelle is doing, or through embedding yourself in the narrative of the country, as Justine is doing with Living Hyphen. I think both routes are important, but we are on a path of, let me put it this way, some incrementalism here.
Other thoughts? decolonizing this work?
I might just add a thought to this conversation. I think, the systems that we're working in are colonized structures. And so there's a ton of barriers to get through in the first place. And we're only going to change those by including the voices of Indigenous youth and allies. And I think as a politician, obviously that representation on the front line or like the face is important, but it's just as important inside those structures and behind the scenes, or however you want to put it, like we need people at every level to be calling those things out and to make changes. And one thing that I really like to think of sometimes, because these structures are huge and they're really intimidating and they can kind of drag you down when you think about them sometimes, is to think of them as a brick wall. And you might not be able to knock the whole wall down, but if you're on the inside chipping away, you can take it down brick by brick.
I can speak to it, maybe not specifically to funding, though I'll relate it after, but in terms of my work with Living Hyphen, decolonizing, as Michelle, as you mentioned, these systems are colonial exploitative structures. And I see that a lot in my work in editing, in curating the stories that go into the magazine. There's so many things I want to say about decolonization, but briefly, in terms of what stories are chosen in this magazine, as an editor, I'm a gatekeeper. We at Living Hyphen choose which stories get published and don't. And it's a very difficult thing that I grapple with, because the stories that we receive, like I mentioned, we've received over 1,000 submissions over the past few years. They're important stories. Each and every single one of them are important stories that need to be told. But how do we do all of that? And so I guess I think about that in terms of funding as well, that there are so many of these ideas that are incredibly, important. And I feel like mine is one of many that just happen to have access to information, to resources, to networks, to even land on this Rising Youth grant. And so how do we decolonize in the sense of how do we make these opportunities more accessible? How do we create more spaces, more funding opportunities? I always this is like a very loose thread that I'm trying to weave here, but when someone is rejected from our magazine, we've created a database of other inclusive publications across Turtle Island, and we encourage these storytellers to keep submitting their stories. We can't publish all of them, but there are so many spaces now growing. It's, when we first started, that definitely wasn't the case, but there are more spaces now where you can get your stories published, and we encourage you to do that. And again, it's that nurturing, that relationship building that is part of decolonizing in every industry, I feel like, where everything has become a power structure. We have forgotten what relationships should look like, and how do we actually nurture people and ideas and youth and all of these different things. And so I guess for me, that's a lot of what I think about when I think about decolonization.
Of course, thank you. Heather, we're almost at time, but I have one final question for you, and it's a bit technical, but I'm thinking from the perspective of someone tuning in just to learn more about this. If someone wants to fund change and participate in a micro grant, how do you do that if you're like not the government? Like if you're just someone who's like, I like this idea, I'm sold, how can I support grassroots youth? What's the best way to get involved and support grassroots youth if you're just like a person in Canada who's like, yeah, we need more of this?
I would say Jennifer is probably the better person to ask, but I would say that there are people doing incredible work in this space, and you should partner with them. And in my work with not-for-profits, they're just the most generous, interesting, insightful, fun people to work with. They will share whatever they have if you have a shared goal. So I would look for organizations like TakingITGlobal. I work with an organization, Students Commission of Canada, which champions youth voice and partners with young people. And I would ask, hey, I'd like to be involved. How could I help? Because they have their finger on the pulse of what's going on and where the needs are. And I think all of us need to work together. We need to partner together to make these things happen. It's so inspiring to hear from Justine, Abigail, and Michelle. And Senator, thank you for the work that you're doing to make the system more accessible for all of us. And as incredible as these young people are, they are not alone. There are so many of them out there with amazing ideas and really incredible will to get it done. So anybody who wants to find a way to fund a young person, they did for $750 what it would have taken me 20 to 30 grand to make happen. So I'm in favor of funding them.
Yeah. Keyword is partnership and talk to young people. Thank you again, Justine, Abigail, you, Dr. Heather Lawson, Michelle Friesen, and Senator Ratna, Omidvar. To our audience at home, if you enjoyed tonight's event, we have more coming up. Next Tuesday, October 18th, we're going to be in Ottawa for the Walrus Talks Global Hunger Crisis. This is presented by Cooperation Canada. We have in-person tickets, but we're also live streaming it. And we hope you'll join us for our next Walrus Talks at Home, which is when we do an online first event. It's on Wednesday, October 26th, and it's on digital citizenship. This is presented by Media Smarts and Meta. Check in with us at thewalrus.ca/events. You can see our schedule. You can register for any events you're interested in. We also post videos of all of our talks. So if you want to share tonight's event or any of the talkers' videos, stay tuned to the website. That'll be posted soon. We'll be in touch by email. You will receive a follow-up email. And the best way to stay in touch with us is to opt into our events newsletter. Now, we also had a piece recently in the Walrus that tells you more about the impact of the Rising Youth Microgrant Program. So we'll include that in the email. So we've been talking about charities and funding and partnership. This is where I get to say the Walrus is a unique beast because we're a registered charity in the media landscape. And we produce award-winning journalism, events, and podcasts. And we do that thanks to our community of support. So if you enjoyed this free event tonight, consider making a donation by visiting thewalrus.ca. All donations, $20 or more, receive a tax receipt. Thanks again, Taking It Global and Jennifer for your generous support. Thanks to our annual sponsors, Air Canada, Inspire, Labatt Breweries of Canada, and Shaw. Community is so important in these times and in this work, and each one of you is part of the Walrus community. Thanks so much for tuning in. Merci, miigwech, and have a great evening ahead.